So you're looking energised and refreshed on day 3 of conference. Weather's a lot brighter than it was, which is a good start. Hopefully we'll be brightening the day up further by talking about boosting electric vehicle adoption. To get to a much greener future. Joining me is a fantastic panel with lots of varied experience. Anyway, I'm Sam Robinson, and I'm a senior researcher at the Social Market Foundation. In case you haven't heard about the Social Market Foundation, we're a small independent cross-party think tank, and we conduct research on a range of areas of public policy. So before we dive into the discussion today, just a little bit of housekeeping. So first and foremost, if there's a fire that breaks out, don't stay in the room. Follow the green man. He's knows where he's going basically. So and then you might have noticed a camera in the corner of the room. So this event is being live streamed as well on YouTube. So any questions you ask, any contributions you make, they'll be saved for posterity on the internet. But you can follow the discussion. Online using our Twitter tags. So at SMF Think Tank and at Uber UK. So obviously we're very grateful to Uber for making today's event possible. You can also use the hashtag LPC24 as well. Without further ado, I'll just introduce the panel. So on my left we have Edward Davison, who's the Public Policy Manager at Uber UK. On my right here we have Michael Solomon Williams, who's the Head of Campaigns for Better Transport. Their main job is advocating for much more integrated, sustainable transport at national level and of course in local contexts. And on my immediate left is Dr. Charly, who is a lecturer in transport at the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Liverpool. So I suppose I'll turn to you first, Edward, to kick us off.
Sure. Well, thanks very much, Sam. Thank you to Social Market Foundation for putting on the event, and looking forward to the discussion. Maybe first, just to give a little bit of context about Uber as a platform. As lots of people might know, Uber's the largest mobility platform in the world, and our mission at Uber is to help people and cities move away from fossil-fueled transport towards a more kind of shared and electric future. Here in the UK, Uber is operating in every region and nation of the UK across hundreds of towns and cities. There are well over 100,000 licensed private hire vehicle drivers working on Uber's platform, and millions of customers using the platform every week. And so, given that sort of scale here in the UK, we're very, very conscious of our responsibility to supporting the ambitions to reach net zero as quickly as possible. Our targets are actually that in the UK, we want every single trip, 100% of trips, to be taking place in zero-emission vehicles by 2030. And in London specifically, we've set the ambition to achieve that same goal by the end of next year, 2025, which is feeling quite close at the moment. I think with those ambitions in mind, we've been working very, very closely with drivers, with policymakers and with other experts, including working closely with Campaign for Better Transport over recent years, to work towards those goals. And I guess just a crucial point before coming on to some of the barriers that we see drivers telling us about, is that as quite high mileage drivers, Uber drivers have a really critical role to play. The average Uber driver will complete the same number of miles in 3 months that a typical driver would in a year. And so for those drivers making the switch to an electric vehicle, they'll make the same emission savings in 3 months that an average driver would take a year to make. So we think that they're a really important cohort of people to think about when it comes to accelerating the transition to EVs. And actually, because of that high mileage use, they can have an outsized impact in the short term on significantly cleaning air in cities around the UK. So in terms of what we hear from drivers, probably three main barriers that come up quite consistently, and we're talking to the driver base at Uber very regularly. The first one, as many people might expect, is cost. Even though the total cost of ownership for an EV in many cases might be lower than a combustion engine equivalent, the upfront cost of the vehicles still generally a bit higher than the petrol and diesel alternatives that Uber drivers might be looking at. And particularly if the comparison is with the second-hand petrol or diesel equivalent, upfront cost can be a real barrier. The second barrier that drivers report to us is the access to and affordability of charging and charging infrastructure. And then the third is probably more around kind of confidence, so a lack of familiarity with the vehicles themselves, concerns sometimes about things like range and what they're going to be like to drive. So I'll just talk very quickly about how we're aiming to address some of those barriers. I think first thing to say on this is probably that we really see this as a partnership between businesses supporting and investing, helping that transition, but also policy and supportive policy working in tandem with that investment. A phrase that we often use is climate is a team sport, and we're very conscious that we can put a huge amount in to help accelerate this transition, but a supportive policy framework will make a huge impact as well, and kind of those two things working in tandem can really accelerate the transition. So just on that first barrier of cost, we've been doing a lot of work to negotiate partnerships with different manufacturers and different suppliers of EVs to try and make the best possible deals available for drivers to make the switch. So we try and make sure that there are a range of options available for drivers, whether that's to rent an EV, whether it's to move into a kind of rent-to-buy arrangement over a period of years, or just to buy it outright. So there are lots of options of ways to access the vehicles, and also significant discounts available to drivers on the upfront cost. We've recently had an offer available on a range of Kia EV models, which have been up to £17,000 of discount, which has been hugely popular. We've also got an offer that we're developing on the new Toyota model, which I think will be really exciting and hopefully a real accelerant of uptake. And then in London specifically, where we've got the target to reach 100% by the end of next year, we've built over time a fund of £145 million, which we're using towards helping drivers financially with the cost of the switch. So any non-EV driver in London today can access £5,000 of grant funding towards helping them to make the switch. So in combination with some of the discounts available, it's well over £20,000 worth of funding to kind of help with that switch. And we also try and use product innovations to help with that cost. So there's a product called Uber Green, which means as a rider you can always select an EV only, and wherever there's enough supply for that product to be able to work, it will be available. And that Uber Green product will always be the same price to a rider as the Uber X product, but the driver will always receive 10% more than they would if they'd been driving in an Uber X. And so, again, trying to really help on that kind of earnings side to make the upfront cost less of a barrier for drivers. And then just very quickly moving on to charging, we recognise that there are lots of areas which are relatively undersupplied with charging. We provided £5 million worth of funding in 3 London boroughs where we knew that there were lots of Uber drivers looking to make the switch, but a relative undersupply of charging, to invest in 700 new public charge points, so totally publicly available, but working closely with those boroughs to identify areas where we can see a need from Uber drivers as well. We've also made a partnership with BP Pulse, which is the kind of EV charging network, so that drivers receive monthly membership for free, and then quite a significant discount on the cost of that rapid and ultra-rapid charging around the UK. And at the moment there's an offer for drivers that if they switch to an EV, or if they're already in an EV, then there'll be 3 months of free charging on the BP Pulse network, which is worth about £750. But finally on charging, I think the other thing that we think is a really exciting opportunity, and maybe something to talk more with Anna about, is that we've got quite a lot of data that will show where charging demand is for Uber drivers as a cohort, and that might be both the kind of on-trip charging demand, where drivers might be looking to top up with rapid and ultra-rapid charging, and also the kind of near-home public charging, where people might be looking to charge overnight or when they're not working. And we're looking to share that data as much as possible with public authorities. We've already shared that data with Transport for London in London, and looking at where else we can do that, so that we can really help to inform and shape decision making about where that charging infrastructure is built. And often the places where private hire vehicle drivers might need charging infrastructure is not necessarily the places that are already high awareness and areas where there is already a supply of charging going into the ground. And then finally, that third barrier in terms of confidence and familiarity. We've built a network of EV ambassadors. So these are experienced Uber drivers who have been driving EVs for a while. And we think that they are the best people to be talking to other drivers who are considering making the switch. I think our experience is that drivers hearing from other drivers about what it's like and how it might have benefited them to move into an EV is far more impactful than hearing from someone like me. So we've created these Go Electric kind of seminar style sessions where EV ambassadors will join, and drivers who are considering the switch can talk to them about what it's like and hear kind of first-hand direct experience. And then alongside that, we're moving towards kind of these large-scale events. We had one recently, it's called a Power Up event, where we get lots and lots of drivers together and give them a chance to test drive lots of different vehicles, kind of go out and see all the various different offers that are available, and have sessions with experts who can sort of talk to them about making the switch. So I mean, maybe just to kind of wrap up, I think there is a really significant effort being made, and I think probably that shows that we haven't yet reached that tipping point where switching to an EV is the kind of obvious choice for someone to make. So it's definitely going to continue to take a huge amount of effort, and I think also, maybe we can come on to this discussion, supportive policy working in tandem with the sorts of efforts that we're making as a business.
Thanks very much, Ed. And I'll bring in Michael now. So, I suppose we've heard a few carrots, I suppose you could call them, in terms of bringing people along and supporting them to adopt EVs. Are we getting the balance right between sort of carrots and sticks in our approach? And how does it all fit into a broader context?
I mean, I think it's probably worth, if I may, speaking to your report, because I don't know if you're otherwise going to mention it, I'll plug it, but Social Market Foundation have just released in July a really superb report, Electric Avenue, and that is a carrot, it's an important carrot, we'll come on to sticks. But what this shows, I think, is quite a compelling new argument to help those most in need. And the context we have at the moment is that people simply don't believe that the initial sunk cost of buying an EV really works for them, and many people, it simply doesn't work. It's not about belief or perception, it's economics, it's inability to afford EVs. And there's a real kind of sense in which, therefore, a certain class of person, and what the SMF report shows is that actually, I think it's 900,000 people could be lifted out. Is that
940 in England, and an additional 136
right, could be
across the UK.
That's extraordinary. It could be lifted out of poverty through this subscription model, and they've studied the French subscription model, which seems to be working. And I mean, I'd say, from our point of view at Campaign for Better Transport, there are a few things that we can certainly learn from France. Not least, people here may be familiar with the Vestment Mobilité, I think it's called, which is effectively akin to the Nottingham workplace parking levy. It's a local transport levy, which means that funds are redirected back into the local authority. And for Nottingham, that's employers of over 11 people. In France, it's for cities or towns of over 10,000 people. And it's this type of model which France really leads the way on. And I think with this subscription model for EVs, they're also leading the way. So I think the report really deserves reading and sharing far and wide. In terms of our approach, I mean, it won't surprise anybody to know that we really see modal shift as priority. Of course, Campaign for Better Transport, we're all about public transport and shared transport. So we will always be flying the flag for trains and buses and trams, but also shared transport. And in fact, if we come onto the sticks, if you like, we did a report a couple of years ago called Pay As You Drive, the British public's view of distance-based road user charging. And I'd like to think of that as, and we talk about carrots and sticks all the time in transport, I'd like to think of that as a kind of combination of a carrot and a stick, perhaps an edible stick if you like that. But effectively, it is both an incentive and a disincentive to drive. And of course for us, we want people to be using Uber, we want people to be using shared transport. Ultimately, we want fewer people to be driving because the reality is, in the big picture, over the last 30 years, emissions from transport have only come down by 3%, and that's with the advances in technology and electric vehicles that we have. And in fact, even the best battery-powered EVs at the moment are still twice as high emitters as trains, right? So we do need to be working always towards that North Star of modal shift. However, of course, we live in the real world. People, as the study has showed, people in Wales in particular, simply don't have access to the public transport network and won't for a very long time. And they need, therefore, ways to be encouraged to adopt EVs, but also ways to see that using a car can be fairer, can make sense, and that the just transition can be achieved. So just to delve in for those, again, I'm sure there are lots of transport experts here who may have read the report. I recommend this report to you as well. It's from 2022. It's on our website. Effectively, it proposes 3 ways of charging by distance. And it's been in the news again a few weeks ago, had lots of coverage for it. There's talk of Rachel Reeves looking at it in the budget this year. The first model would be EV only, based on distance, and based on the distance measurement taken from the odometer, or mileometer if you like, in a vehicle. So it's not smart in that sense. There's no, people, sometimes the public perception is they're afraid of being tracked, even though we all have smartphones. But anyway, that fear is there. This wouldn't be that. It would simply be calculated from the odometer. The second model is both EVs and ICEs, and that would charge ICEs slightly more than EVs, so that would incentivise people to adopt EVs. And the third model would be smart, and in fact that would result in people who drive less paying less. And we think that's really compelling, because at the moment, when you get talk of distance-based road user charging, the headline is always, EV users will be charged more, or drivers will be charged more. It's simply not about that. And we found in our research, we did 4 focus groups, and we had to survey 3,000 people as well through More in Common. And we found that when people actually discussed the options that we proposed, and they saw that it was about fairness, and indeed that people will become richer, many people as a result, those who lived in rural areas drove once a week and would become richer through a tax-free mileage allowance, people were really on board. I mean, the majority of people were on board. So it was, in that sense, quite a seminal report. So, yeah, I think of distance-based road user charging as very much part of this picture. And as I say, sorry for the terrible, amalgamated analogy, a combination of a carrot and a stick. In terms of sticks, however, sticks alone, they're vital. I mean, congestion zones are important, absolutely. CPZs, etc., measures that disincentivise people from driving.
Sorry, what's a CPZ?
CPZ, a controlled parking zone, things like this. Local measures that disincentivise people from driving are vital, but you simply can't have them on their own, of course. And I think we're finding in areas where there are controlled parking zones and other such sticks, they only really work if there are enough shared vehicles around. And this is another really important area we should cover. So Uber is leading the way, and very inspiringly so. But shared transport has to be, different forms of shared transport, I should say, other than Uber. So car rental, car clubs, and indeed the subscription model in France, I believe, is finding its way into the UK without yet being subsidised by government. There needs to be a government target. There's no strategy really for shared transport, and we're still finding that the Zip cars, the enterprise, they're having to absorb congestion charges and things like this. There isn't a procurement framework for EVs, and there's a lot of help that sector needs. And indeed, from our point of view, at Campaign for Better Transport, it is holistic, our approach, but we really believe that shared transport needs to be perceived initially by our government and then by the public as more akin to public transport than private transport, and that simply isn't yet the case. We see a car we think is a car, therefore it's private transport. It simply isn't for Zipcar Enterprise. Other models are available. So some really key parts of this picture, as I say, are shared transport, distance-based road user charging, and public understanding of that being fairer and indeed making people richer in the process. And ultimately keeping our eyes on the North Star. Many people will know we are here to talk cars, but many people will know the quote, a sign of a developed society is not one where the poor drive, it's where the rich use public transportation. Often attributed to Gustavo Petro, but I've been reminded it was in fact a different former mayor of Bogota, Enrique Peñalosa. But it's a really kind of inspiring phrase. I think it's always worth us remembering. And looking at the UK picture, looking at transport deserts, which SMF have done such great work recently on highlighting. Transport poverty is a huge issue in this country. Key stats for us that we roll out all the time: 3/4 of journeys in London are made by sustainable modes, whether that's walking, cycling or public transport. The rest of the country, the average is 1/4. I mean, that's extraordinary if you think of it like that. And looking at cost, again, this is from the SMF report, we know that the average household costs on transport in London are half the national average. I think it's £500 a year, 1,000 as the national average. So it's kind of bizarre when the economic centre is London and people simply are paying half the national average for transport, full stop. So this needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency, and that involves ultimately public transport being what we're always working towards expanding. But in the meantime, to bring it back to the focus here, I really heartily endorse this report from SMF and the work that Uber are doing. And I think what's so vital about Uber's approach, especially with these ambassadors, is actually changing perceptions of electric vehicles in a way that no one else really is doing. And it's worrying when we see that sales are levelling out for electric vehicles. The pushing back the ZEV mandate to 2035 was a debatably useful decision at the time. And actually this kind of public influencing that Uber leads the way on is vital. And I think if we can get the message through to this new government that SNF's proposal is logical, then I think we'll be making great progress. So I can come back to many more issues, but I'll wrap up there.
Fantastic, thanks, Michael, and you're making my job a lot easier in terms of plugging the report. So I'll turn now to Anna. I mean, obviously, range anxiety is a going concern in terms of EVs, often cited as one of the definitive barriers to more adoption. So what more can we be doing? What more could we be doing to combat that?
I work mainly in EV feasibility studies, looking at proposed approach and comparing that with the socio-demographics of the area and all that. So when you look at range anxiety, that definitely is something that needs to be addressed. And to really answer your question, we need to look at the transport network as a whole, and we need to think about charging. So there are 3 different types of charging, which is like the slow residential charging, sort of shared residential charging points, and there is fast charging points, which could be at the destination, and then we also need like on-road charging points, which are nearer to motorways or things like that, in order to facilitate someone to take longer journeys. So we need to be focusing on all these 3 different types of charging infrastructure, and that's for one. And then even when we look at EV adoption, if we look from a private EV adoption point of view,
there's a certain amount that government could do in terms of incentivising manufacturers to prioritise advertising EVs, and then really this, just to wheel back to your report. I mean, I think awareness of a subscription model, if one were to be adopted, would be transformative. Actually, I think there's a long way to go in terms of actually enabling there to be significant acceleration of what has been a slow and uptake. And we do need kind of radical incentives such as this.
Can you just explain what the subscription model is? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Sam, do you want to?
Yes, I mean, the idea in France is they call it social leasing, basically. So, because the government has a lot more purchasing and procurement power, they can either hire sort of large fleets and rent them out at lower rates, or they can encourage people to join car clubs, that essentially offer a social lease, so sort of a discounted price essentially to rent the
including the cost of buying electric for a period of time.
Yeah, so yeah, they'll sort of lend the car basically, and it would be slightly below market rate, and the government steps in to support that, enable that reduction from market rate for people who may find it difficult to join those electric car clubs.
Sort of help to buy for cars in a sense.
Yeah, it's sort of help to buy.
Less controversial.
Less controversial.
At Liverpool conference.
Possibly more effective. Yes. So Anna, you want to comment on anything?
On that, definitely policy plays a huge role in how people and commercial industries are encouraged to take up EVs, and like as everyone said here, that it's important that the commercial sector also gets involved in transition of EVs, because the number of trips that are being traveled and the number of emissions, the amount of emissions generated per vehicle is much higher for this sort of fleet vehicle. So it is really important to consider good transition. And even in charging infrastructure, there are a few innovative models. I don't know if that's still active or not, but there are some innovative charging models like the Charge PNB, some similar concept to the Airbnb, where you own a charging infrastructure in your place. You can give it a sort of, if someone's around that area and then they're short of charge. So again, alleviating the charge anxiety issue, range anxiety issue. So maybe you could plug into someone else's charging point.
Great. So I think we have 20-ish minutes for questions, so I'll take them in threes. So first off, gentleman, second row.
Thank you. Yeah, burning question on my mind really, because I bought an EV 6 months ago, and I don't have a home charger, so I'm totally reliant on the public charging network. I live in Greater Manchester, and I guess my biggest challenge, apart from the frustration that I'm not allowed to run a cable onto the street with a bridge or a gully, that I'm not allowed to do that in the council area where I live, and I'd be interested to know whether there's going to be any pressure put on councils to support that. I think some London boroughs are doing it, but probably the biggest, that's one frustration. I'm totally sold on having an EV, but the whole experience is loaded with frustrations. The other one is I'm paying a lot of the times between 70 and 80 pence a kilowatt to buy electricity on the public charging network, and that includes VAT, doesn't it, at the moment? And there's no sign of any reduction in that, despite the fact the wholesale cost of electric came down since the energy crisis we had last winter. And I'm wondering, is there anything that you're aware of coming to, put pressure on BP Pulse and the other main providers? There's several. Shell Recharge is the one I use the most actually, and they're a little bit cheaper. But actually at 70 to 80 pence a kilowatt in a car that does 4.5 to 5 miles per kilowatt, that's more than buying petrol. It's more expensive to travel in an EV if you're reliant on the public charging network.
Right. Do we have any more questions? Not for now. Okay. So maybe we could start with the.
Yeah, well, I didn't know if you wanted an answer to that. Sorry, I wonder. I feel like Ed might have an answer, so I don't want to send it your way. But I think it's a really important question, because I've heard this before, and that's one of the most problematic disincentives to making the case. But that's
I mean, I'm fortunate that I don't do a high mileage because I'm retired. But for somebody commuting to work or using an EV on a daily basis, it's a luxury for me to own one, because it's costing me more than it did buying petrol. And that's just wrong, isn't it, really?
Yeah. I mean, and certainly if you think about professional drivers, it has to be a rational financial decision for them to make the switch to an EV. And I don't think it would be fair to expect any professional driver to take any different view on that. And so, yeah, I think from our perspective, rapid and ultra rapid charging, like you mentioned on the BP Pulse network and others, that has a very important role to play. But generally, that will be, as Anna was saying, that's part of a mix of different types of charging solution. And I suspect if you lived on a street where there was a lamppost charger that you could use overnight and where the tariff drops
There are
down
hardly
from
any of
midnight to
those.
7, that might be very helpful, and that's certainly what we see from Uber
Yeah.
drivers. Uber drivers, as people, well, they are unlikely to have private driveways, particularly people that are working in dense urban environments, and so they're like you, very reliant on public charging, which is why we've been doing so much work to ensure that there's access to discounted rates. I think just on that point about cross-channel solutions, I think there were some efforts made to try and ease the kind of process of getting permission to run these cross-channels. So for people that aren't aware, it's essentially if you've got a parking space outside your home which is on public road, you can create a channel through the pavement that isn't a trip hazard compared to running a wire across the pavement, and run the wire through there and then still have access to domestic charging. Yeah, or a bridge. And so I think certainly anything that can be done to accelerate access to those sorts of solutions, we would welcome.
And the advice I've had from my local council on that is not illegal, but if one of my neighbours complained about it or tripped over it, I'd be liable legally for anything that might happen to somebody.
How the discounted rates that you speak of, how do you get access to them for your drivers?
Well, I think it's partly, Uber is operating at quite a significant scale, and I think a lot of these charge point operators are building a lot of infrastructure in anticipation of lots of people making the transition to EVs. And I think at this point, being in a position to be able to say, that we can drive demand towards, charging solutions, is a really good thing from those charge point operators' perspective, because it helps to build confidence about utilisation of the charge points, and that enables us to be able to offer discounted rates to drivers. We're co-funding some of those discounts as well, so I think I'm not 100% sure of the kind of financials of it, but the monthly subscription I think is partly co-funded, so waiving that monthly subscription to drivers. But I think that's also one of the reasons why I think data sharing and different businesses coming in and sharing data with local authorities and others that are building this infrastructure is a really important part of the picture, because if you can give charge point operators confidence that there will be demand and that if you invest in building the infrastructure, it will get utilised, then that helps them to feel confident about making the investment, and also hopefully can help with the cost as well.
Anna, did you want to come in on
it's really there is a need to have slow residential shared charging points where users can charge overnight, and that's something that's really needed, and it's something that's missing in the
I've got another question in the front row here.
Hi there, Ed Gibbs from Jaguar Land Rover. So we are the UK's largest automotive manufacturer. We employ 34,000 people here in the UK, including about 6,000 just down the road at our Halewood plant, where we build plug-in hybrid Range Rover Evoque and Discovery Sport. It's really interesting to hear some of the concerns raised by the panel today. Some people in this room might be aware, but we are, as a brand, totally committed to electric future. By the end of the decade, all of our vehicles will be available as an electric variant. So we're absolutely behind the transition to electric. But I think it's fair to say we're definitely in an inflection point in the market where there is a struggle with demand from the consumer. And some of the issues that were touched on today about the changes to the congestion charge, for example, coming down the track. We've also, I think just this year, the change to the allowable mileage you can claim for an EV has actually gone down, and where at the same time petrol mileage has gone up. So it seems from our perspective that there's lots of different policy levers in play, and they aren't quite joined up across government. I'd be really interested to hear from the panel what ideas you might have for how government could better work together to encourage people to make the switch. And finally, for me, I'd say there's also, I think, more work for the industry to do, more work for my company to do in the space where at the moment we see some really negative press and misinformation around EVs. If you're a car nerd like me, you go on car forums, you see endless comments about oh, they should have just made this as a V8, electric's rubbish, all that sort of stuff, which just builds and builds and builds and is really unhelpful to the point where, for the consumer, it has to be as easy as possible to make the switch to buy an EV. The customer experience needs to be seamless. It needs to be just as easy as getting out and filling your car up from a petrol pump. That's certainly something that we know as a producer of premium luxury cars. If we're asking our customer to pay more for something, it has to be a seamless consumer experience for them. And we're getting there, but there's lots of barriers in the way to that at the moment. So I'd be interested in the panel's views.
Yeah, so I suppose a question there around making sure there's a joined up strategy, and a question I suppose as well about how you get government working effectively with business.
Well, if I may, I would say that makes the case fairly strongly for option 2 of the distance-based road user charging that we proposed, because that disincentivises ICEs and incentivises EVs. So, and the point about, well, one of the points about it is that the longer we wait, the more money the Treasury will lose. You know, at the moment, what we're hearing, you know, of course, that we need to be making savings, and there's a £65 billion black hole looming from not acting at the moment. So, because that's what will be lost by the Treasury when the mandate is fully in place. So, if we act now, if we start to implement, again, it doesn't have to be Smart's program, and I think Smart would be good because people would get the higher tax-free mileage allowances. But if we go with option 2 at this point, immediately there's an incentive for people to be using EVs, and they'll see 2 options. Which do I choose? And that, because as you say, it does sound like policy is far too disconnected, and that would be one way to tie those things together. So, yeah, we would have to encourage people to look into that proposal that we've made and to endorse it and to talk about it more and more. Because I think, again, going back to some of the kind of cultural war stuff, that's one which has massively been unnecessarily dragged into sort of misinterpretation, and will find its way, I'm sure, onto driver forums and so forth. And now they're trying to make us, pay more for it, which is not what it's about at all. And I think that incentive point is really vital in terms of the just transition.
So, Michael, just to briefly play devil's advocate, replacing road tax and the need to address that looming black hole, been agreed upon by Westminster figures, policy wonks, the whole gamut really for decades at this point. Was tried the last time Labour were in power. What would you say? Why hasn't it happened yet? If there's clearly a looming need for it, and
I think there's been, it's, as you say, it's really good to remember that it has been talked about for a very long time, and as you say, last time around Labour nearly got there, but there's been a real sense of fear, I think a political fear basically, of losing their voters' vote, and I mean, I think it's for Labour last time around, it's funny enough to be where we are now and talking about it and still see that there are barriers to public perception. It's amazing that we got as far as we did in terms of considering it back then, because we weren't. Uber were no way as far ahead as they are now. The EV development, technologically was no way as far ahead as it is now. The members of the public weren't. You would rarely meet members of the public who had an EV. So we're way further down the track. I think it's just reasons it hasn't happened in the past. I would suggest that there wasn't sufficient research done. There weren't sufficient propositions. I would say that because we did such a great report and proposed 3 good models. But I haven't seen models which made the case for equality and made the case for the just transition in the same way. So each time previously, political parties have got scared. Now, I hope now is indications of something more hopeful. I don't think it'll happen this year, but I think if as we hear Rachel Reeves is looking at it, then maybe it'll happen this parliamentary term.
Great.
I'd just like to comment on the kind of consumer experience dimension of that question, because I think that is really important. Obviously, building a perception that these are good vehicles and that they're good to use. It's a nice experience being an EV is really important. A lot of people actually their first trip in an EV is by taking a kind of a shared trip, whether that's on Uber or another platform. And what we often hear is drivers saying, people get in, they're like, oh, this is actually a really nice vehicle. It's lovely to drive, it's really smooth, it's really quiet. And so, again, I think that emphasises why helping high mileage professional drivers to make the transition as soon as possible can actually play a really big role in acting as a catalyst for public perceptions on EVs to change. And the other thing that I think is maybe worth drawing out a bit is that we think there's quite a good role that tech platforms can play in innovating to make the consumer experience of an EV a really good one. So if you go into your app and you've taken green trips, you'll see rider emission savings. You'll get a screen that tells you how many kilograms of carbon you've saved by taking trips in EVs, or indeed by booking trains through the platform and saving carbon that way. And so I think there are lots of little innovations we can make, and both on the consumer side and on the driver side. So drivers having battery-aware matching, that means that they won't be offered a trip that's going to take them 60 miles out to an airport if we can already see that the range left in their vehicle won't match them with that trip. That removes some of the frustration that you can have in driving an EV. I think some of these kinds of ways that we can innovate on the product side can really help to change perceptions and shape the experience so that it's a positive one.
Anna?
Definitely EV transition is something that is needed, but then how we introduce this transition and how the infrastructure is introduced into the entire region, that needs more planning, I would say, and a proper strategy, considering the different uses. Like for companies, for corporates, it would be different plan. For private, the needs, the challenges are very different for private electric vehicles, and for private for public, for commercial electric vehicles. So a proper strategy and a plan needs to be in place so that we can move towards a successful and just transition, I would say.
Okay, so I think we have a few questions. So I'll take a bundle and I'll put them to the panel. So a couple in the second row here.
I'm Matt Crouch, I'm from Believe. We're a charge point operator, actually working with some of Ed's colleagues rolling out chargers in 2 of the 3 London boroughs. I was just going to revisit the VAT point. I think it's really important for public charging. I was interested on the panel's views. So at the moment there's differential levels of VAT, so public chargers, people have to pay 20% VAT. You only pay 5% VAT on domestic electricity. There's a real risk there that we're locking in inequity between people who don't have access to off-street parking and people who do. It's already more likely to be on a lower income scale, so we think there's a real challenge there that government needs to look at.
And another question here.
I just wanted to ask whether you think there's any chance that all the different private companies who provide charging points, you need to charge up, you've got to go to BV, or you've got to go to ZapMap, or you've got to go to PodPoint. I have had to educate myself about apps, and I've had to make sure I've got battery in my phone. The number of times I've stood, the only place I've ever charged my car, I've had it 6 years, ever charged my car outside my home, and I'm lucky enough to have, a front garden, so I can do it easily, is Chester Zoo, because I go and meet friends in Chester, so I go to Chester Zoo. It's the only place I dare to charge it up, because otherwise, and then a number of times I've stood there, not enough battery, wind blowing, raining, and I'm trying to get into the app to tell them, and I checked the night before that I've got enough money on there, but it still can go wrong at the time when you're standing outside the car, and it's so frustrating. Why can't they all get together and give us electricity? It just drives me scatty.
I have a third question in the second row over here.
Yeah, it wasn't so much a question. I just wanted to come back on the initial gentleman's query. So I'm Rebecca Hayes. I'm from Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, and I'm the lead on local electric vehicle infrastructure. So there is LEVI for short. There is LEVI funding coming out. So this is nationally, and we are looking to prioritise customers like this without access to off-street parking, to look at kind of putting charging points in for them. So we've secured funding, we're looking at locations at the moment. I know this is going on in Manchester as well, it's going on across the country. So hopefully, your issues will be getting resolved within the next couple of years. It is coming.
Yeah,
People are
thank you.
working on it.
If I move to Liverpool, will it be better?
I can't promise that, but
Great. So so 5 minutes. I'll ask the panel to keep it short and sweet. Question on VAT and also the patchwork quilt of charging providers. Anyone want to take that on, Ed, maybe?
Patchwork quilt. There were a set of charge point regulations passed last year, which I think are going to be massively helpful on that front. So kind of rules around interoperability and people being able to access different charge point providers. Friend from Believe will probably be able to give you a lot more detail on that, but I think that we will start to see really significant improvements on that in the near term. And then also just to say, I think the 381 million of Levi funding, is playing a huge role, and I think that's exactly an example of where combining data sharing with local authorities, combined authorities, subnational transport bodies, so that can really shape and inform where that infrastructure is built. I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Great.
I forgot to mention, and there is going to be tariff control built into those, so that should hopefully put a bit of confidence there that there will be some tariff control, and then again that should provide a bit of competition, so hopefully that will gradually draw down prices.
Great. Michael?
Well, I mean, I was going to leave that to others. Perhaps Anna, if you'd like to cover that. So I would have talked about interoperable apps and so forth, and just, I guess, a lot of what we do is represent the public's experience and voice. So it's really good to hear, not good to hear frustrations, but useful to hear frustrations, and good to hear what's being done from this perspective. And also really inspiring. I'm learning here as much as offering things. It's really inspiring to hear what Liverpool are doing on Levi. So lots to be feeling positive about, I think.
And Anna, our final word.
Yeah, it's great to know that local councils are really putting in the effort now. There is a plan in place. Of course, it's going to take time. So, technology and the transition will take time. But so there's this approach that in sustainable transport, like avoid, shift, improve approach, sort of avoiding unnecessary travel, sort of work from home strategy and sort of things, and then shifting to a more sustainable transport where possible to public transport, and then improving the existing transport infrastructure that is available in place. And I think we are moving more towards that. It is really a long way ahead, but still, moving towards that.
Fantastic. Well, once again, I'd like to thank our panel for a fascinating discussion, and thank Uber for making today possible. And yes, we did a great job about plugging the report. I have another thing to plug. The conference is obviously coming to a close, but if you we have a newsletter called Wonk Week, which I urge you to sign up to, and that's just the latest intel from the think tank world, the policy world, in little bite-sized nuggets. So do urge you to sign up to that after this event. But thank you all for coming.